verses, starting at verse 8, going up through chapter 2, verse 10. It's actually a pretty long reading, but it's a great story. Now, a new king arose over Egypt who did not know Joseph. He said to his people, "Look, the Israelite people are more numerous and more powerful than we. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them, or they will increase and, in the event of war, join our enemies and fight against us and escape from the land." Therefore, they set taskmasters over them to oppress them with forced labor. They built supply cities, hid them in Ramses for Pharaoh. But the more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied and spread, so that the Egyptians came to dread the Israelites. The Egyptians became ruthless in imposing tasks on the Israelites, and made their lives bitter with hard service in mortar and brick and in every kind of field labor. They were ruthless in all the tasks that they imposed on them. The king of Egypt said to the Hebrew midwives, one of whom was named Shiphrah, and the other Puah, "When you act as midwives to the Hebrew women and see them on their birth stool, if it is a boy, kill him. But if it is a girl, she shall live." But the midwives feared God. They did not do as the king of Egypt commanded them, but they let the boys live. So the king of Egypt summoned the midwives and said to them, "Why have you done this and allowed the boys to live?" The midwives said to Pharaoh, "Because the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women, for they are vigorous and give birth before the midwife comes to them." So God dealt well with the midwives, and the people multiplied and became very strong. And because the midwives feared God, he gave them families. Then Pharaoh commanded all his people, "Every boy that is born to the Hebrews shall throw into the Nile, but you shall let every girl live." Now a man from the house of Levi went and married a Levite woman. The woman conceived and bore a son. And when she saw that he was a fine baby, she hid him 3 months. When she could hide him no longer, she got a papyrus basket for him and plastered it with bitumen and pitch. She put the child in it and placed it among the reeds on the bank of the river. Her sister stood at a distance to see what happened to him. The daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe at the river. While her attendees walked beside the river, she saw the basket among the reeds and sent her maid to bring it. When she opened it, she saw the child. He was crying, and she took pity on him. "This must be one of the Hebrew children," she said. Then his sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go and get you a nurse from the Hebrew woman to nurse the child for you?" Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Yes." So the girl went and called the child's mother. Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Take this child and nurse it for me, and I will give you your wages." So the woman took the child and nursed it. When the child grew up, she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and she took him as her son. She named him Moses, because she said, "I drew him out of the water." Our second reading is from the Gospel of Matthew, the 16th chapter, verses 13 through 20. Now when Jesus came into the district of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say that the Son of Man is?" And they said, "Some say John the Baptist, but others Elijah, and still others Jeremiah, or one of the prophets." He said to them, "But who do you say that I am?" Simon Peter answered, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." And Jesus answered him, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father in heaven. And I tell you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not prevail against it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven." Then he sternly ordered the disciples not to tell anyone that he was the Messiah. The word of the Lord. Will you pray with me? God, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be pleasing and acceptable in your sight. You, O Lord, who are our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. A king arose in Egypt who knew not Joseph. So my wife Lindy and I, one of our favorite bars in the whole area is the Churchville Inn. Some of you may have been to it before. And we got to know several of the staff people, and one of the guys who used to be a bartender has since moved on to a wonderful place in Jenkintown if you're ever looking for the water. But he always made us feel special. Like it's part of the reason we went there, right? This is why you go to like your favorite coffee shop or your favorite bar restaurant. It's the cheers thing where everybody knows your name. He would give us discounts. He would pour draft beers that he knew we would like without even ordering them. It was just, we felt known. And then one day we went, and it was like a weird weekend, and like Joe was gone, the whole staff was on vacation, and we didn't know anybody at our favorite place. And we had a decent time, but like we just looked at each other and we're like, and then there came a Pharaoh that knew not Joseph, right? Like it's such an interesting way to begin this reading, isn't it? Because if you read the book of Genesis, it's like the book of Genesis seems like one step forward, two steps back sometimes. Like after the tragic fall of Adam and Eve, it seems like God is trying to just outpace the curse with a blessing. And it seems like the curse starts winning. And then finally at the end of Genesis, things start to look pretty good. This dysfunctional family, and by the way, show me a family that's not dysfunctional. I'll show you a family that keeps good secrets. But this dysfunctional family where the favoritism with the parents and children is so bad that the siblings actually contemplate killing Joseph. I mean, maybe, I was only a child, so I don't know much about sibling rivalry. My guess is, if you have sibling rivalry, this is about as bad as it gets when death is contemplated. So he gets sold into slavery, and then through all these weird and mysterious turns, Joseph experiences some real healing, and so does his dad. And it looks like things are going to be hunky-dory, right? It looks like the best days are in front of them. And then, we don't even know, this is generations later or something, there's a new king who knows not Joseph. All of the glory days, all of that wonderful story seems forgotten. You know what's interesting? In the beginning of Exodus, you don't hear God speak at all. No, I mean, God would put his arm around Abraham. He would, send angels. Jacob gets the stairway from heaven, right? Not Led Zeppelin, but something related. There's all these visions. In the beginning of Exodus, God is silent. Completely silent. But something happens in the story that if it had not happened, we would have never had Matthew 16, the second reading. Because had the Jewish people died out, we would have never had the prophets, priests, and kings we read about in the rest of the Old Testament, and we would never have Jesus, the Messiah. You know what I find so interesting about this reading? That two people are named in the first chapter. The midwives. Shiphrah and Puah. We don't know anything about what their lives were like. Nothing. I mean, scholars can speculate about what life was like in ancient areas. But no, you know what's interesting is not named? The king of Egypt. Just another king of Egypt. Now, my guess is if you're sitting on the ground, that Puah and Shiphrah looked pretty inconsequential. You could probably miss them, right? No, you could never miss the king of Egypt, right? Never. We've seen Prince of Egypt, Ten Commandments, Yul Brynner. You have a sense of what the king of Egypt looks like. If I say Pharaoh, you've got all these images in your mind. If I say Hebrew midwives, all right. But what's interesting, they're the only ones named. And the king's not named, he's forgotten. And it's through their sacrifice that the story goes on, and eventually, a little guy named Moses is born. I think one of the things that is, we are completely unreliable at telling or listening to our own stories sometimes. Because like if you say like, hey, what's going on in your church, or what's going on in your life, or what's happening, or what's your plan for the future, what's your hopes and dreams? Like, man, I don't know. Like, we're a small congregation, or man, my best years. I thought I was going to be more successful by this time in my life as a father, as a business person, as a teacher, whatever it is. We often think, right, that when things are seemingly not going our way, that God's not at work. Actually, oftentimes, it's just when we think things aren't going our way that God does His best work. That even though nobody is, we don't read that anybody in the book of Exodus is going to impressive religious services. We don't read that there's a big rally with a big worship band, or that they have great religious imaginations or doing great programming. There's just some midwives that don't listen to this king of Egypt because they know that something about that just doesn't feel right because they fear God. They know that there's something bigger in the universe than the king of Egypt. And in that awareness, a seed's planted and Moses is born. Our second reading, the gospel reading, is one of my favorite passages in Matthew because, like, Jesus' reaction to Peter's confession is so interesting. Like, the disciples look like the worst adult Sunday school class that ever existed, right? They always get it wrong. They always seem to do the wrong thing. They always seem to do the opposite of what they should do. And then finally, somebody gets it. Jesus is like he's doing a Gallup poll. What do they say to them? Well, 30% of the people say you're right. And Peter's like, I got a guess. He gets it right. He's the Messiah. I expect Jesus to go, finally, one of you morons gets it, right? But he doesn't. So you know what? That was a gift. Man, you saw something. That was a gift that you could see that. It was a gift. Because seeing Jesus for who he really is often incredibly difficult because the people that we tend to think are important are people like the king of Egypt, right? Whose name is never remembered. But in the moment, like, who's your king of Egypt? Maybe it's the parent that really never listened to you as a kid. Or maybe it's that coworker that you feel like is controlling your life every day at work because they have these little things they do, they get under your skin, they have a lot of power in the system, and you feel like, gosh, I need this job, I can't quit. Maybe it's the kid that is not turning out the way you wish, and they're the king of Egypt because they feel like they have this power. Or maybe it's like stress over, like, oh my gosh, are we going to get a new pastor? What about our building? What about our air conditioner? What are we here? The kings of Egypt, what they do is they come in and they sort of crowd the voice of God out. But Jesus didn't look like a king at all. What king rules naked from a cross? But that is another place God looks silent, right? God looks silent in Exodus 1. God looks silent at the cross. But here, Peter speaks. You know what I love about this story? Peter is like the arch disciple of sort of, if the disciples are the bad class, he's like the worst people. He's unstable, he's volatile, he's cutting people's ears off sometimes, he's doing all other things. When he makes this confession, Jesus says, Simon, I love this, Simon, you are Peter, Petros, you're Rocky. I'm sure you're Rocky. I'm sure the disciples thought it was a joke. That guy's Rocky? He's the most unstable one in the crowd. You're saying he's Rocky? Jesus, this is a bad joke. No, but that's what Jesus does. He actually sees something in us that we don't see in ourselves. Just like no one thought these Hebrew midwives were going to be part of the greatest story ever told. Nobody would pick Peter out of the lot to be part of the healing of the cosmos, right? Nobody would pick any of us on our shadow side bad days. But that's the beauty of the story, is that when we feel like God is most absent, when we feel like we don't have something to sort of say, hey, look, I'm a good religious person, or I'm successful, or my life's really going well, right? You believe it, right? When we can't tell anybody any more con job stories, and we just have to say, hey, I'm just in need. That's when God does his best work. There's this really interesting story. It's apocryphal, but if it's not true, it should have been. That there was a shepherd when Jesus was born. This is an Italian sort of folk story. That there was a shepherd who was embarrassed because he didn't have any gifts to bring to the Blessed Virgin when Jesus is born, and so he sort of is skulking in the corner, embarrassed. And Mary, the newborn mother, is so busy, and everybody else has all these gifts to bring, and she's so tired, and she sees someone with empty hands, and just puts the baby Jesus in the shepherd's hands. Oftentimes, the place where the gospel takes the deepest root is when our hands feel empty. We don't have anything to bring. Like, hey, we're kind of on our last leg here. And actually, when we feel like we're on our last leg, it's actually when God gives us new legs, new hearts, and a new name. That on this rock, the church will be built. And on this rock, as we confess the name of King Jesus, friend to sinners. And when his name is confessed, the kings of Egypt shrink. And the voices go by. Amen. Let's continue worshiping the song.